Chapter 38. They ran into two more of the disguised conner nets along the way, both of which Mara insisted on tripping and disposing of. Luke wasn't convinced himself that was necessary, but on the other hand, he couldn't see how it could hurt either. If the first net hadn't triggered any alarms, and there was no indication it had, then taking down the other two probably wouldn't do anything either, and at least it gave the insectoid service droids something to do that was back out of their way. The background hum had also increased as they traveled down the tunnel, reaching a volume where Luke could definitely tell it was coming from above them. The fortress's huge power generator undoubtedly sealed safely away inside solid rock beyond their reach. And eventually, after perhaps 100 meters, the tunnel ended in a large, well-lit room. "I was right," Mara murmured from Luke's side as they stood together at the archway entrance. "I knew he'd have a place like this stashed away. Even in his own fortress, hidden away from his own people. I just knew it." Luke nodded silently, gazing into the chamber. It was roughly circular, dome-shaped at the top, 60 meters across at the base, and a good 10 high at the center, all carved out of solid rock. A 3-meter wide ring of tiled floor ran around the outer edge of the level of the tunnel, dropping then a meter down to the main floor, which was also tiled. 5 meters up the sides, behind a protective railing, a balcony deeply indented into the rock ran 2/3 of the way around the room, its inner walls lined with electronic equipment. On the main floor to their far right was a more modest version of the command center they'd found in the upper floor of the Hand of Thrawn. This one was only a single ring of consoles, centered not on a galactic hollow, but on the wide, squat cylinder of a superstorage library computer information base. Again, as in the fortress above, a handful of glowing lights indicated the equipment was waiting patiently on standby. The rest of the main floor was empty except for a row of furniture lined up against one edge of the raised walkway beneath a plastic sheet. But all of that was just background, things to be peripherally noted and filed away into his mind for later evaluation. From the first moment he and Mara had entered the room, Luke's full attention had been focused on the deep alcove coming off the main room over to their left. Sealed there behind a solid transparasteel wall was a complete cloning apparatus. A Sparty cylinder wrapped in nutrient tubes and flash learning cables, surrounded by support equipment, all of it tied into a humming fusion generator. And floating gently in the center of the cylinder, asleep, or perhaps not even yet truly alive, was a blue-skinned adult humanoid. A humanoid with an exceptionally familiar face. Grand Admiral Thrawn. 10 years, Luke said quietly. Just like you said. Just like you figured. He told them he'd return in 10 years. The old fraud, Mara muttered, the words in sharp contrast to the reluctant awe Luke could sense in her. He could sympathize. The alcove and its occupant were intimidating in their subtle grandeur, and in their equally quiet threat. Probably had the cycle set on a 10-year timer and just reset it back to zero every time he dropped by for a visit. Probably, Luke agreed, tearing his eyes away from the almost hypnotic sight of the floating clone and looking over at the ring of consoles at the other end of the room. R2, get over there and find a computer jack you can link into. Start downloading everything you can find about the unknown regions area Thrawn opened up. The little droid warbled acknowledgement and rolled past him to one of the half-dozen ramps leading from the outer ring down to the main floor. He made it down the ramp without tipping over and headed for the console ring, his wheels clattering rhythmically across the small gaps between the tiles as he went. He stopped beside one of the consoles, whistled a confirmation, then extended his computer jack and plugged in. "He's in," Luke said, turning back to the cloning tank. "Come on, I want a closer look at this." Together, he and Mara circled the room to the transparasteel wall. "Don't touch it," Mara warned as he leaned in close. "It's probably wired with alarms." "I wasn't going to," Luke assured her, peering inside. From this angle, he could see something that hadn't been visible from the archway. "You see what else he's got in there with him?" "A couple of Ysalamiri," Mara nodded, "just in case a wandering Jedi happened by." Thrawn was the type to think of everything, He sure was, Mira agreed. Except maybe that lake out there. Luke frowned. What do you mean? Over there, Mira said, half turning and pointing across the room. Luke turned to look. There was the rock wall and the furniture beneath the plastic sheet, and the upper equipment balcony running around the dome above it. What exactly am I looking at? He asked. The water damage, she said, pointing again. On the wall across from the tunnel mouth. See? I do now, Luke said, nodding. The wall over there was subtly but definitely discolored, the stain marked with multiple vertical lines where water had seeped through the rock and dripped down. In fact, now that he was paying attention, he could see water oozing slowly through the rock in a dozen places. Child of Wind said the lake has been expanding, he said. Looks like it found a way in through the caverns. He turned back. I'd say our clone reached his 10-year mark just in time. What do you think he'll be like? Mira asked, her voice sounding odd. I mean, how close to the original Thrawn will he be? Luke shook his head. That's an argument that's been going on for decades, he said. With the same genetic structure plus a flash learning pattern taken directly from the template, a clone should theoretically be completely identical to the original person. But despite that, they're never exactly the same. Maybe some of the mental subtleties get blurred over in transition, or maybe there's something else unique inside us that a flash learning reader isn't able to pick up. He nodded towards the clone. He'll presumably have all of Thrawn's memories, but will he have his genius, or his leadership, or his single-minded drive? I don't know. He looked at Mira, which I suppose leads us to the question of what we do with him. Funny you should ask that, Mira said pensively. 10 years ago, I'd have said flat out that we blast our way out and get rid of him. Maybe even 5 years ago. But now, it's not so simple anymore. Luke studied her profile, trying to sort through the mixture of emotions swirling through her. You really were spooked by all of that talk about distant threats, weren't you? To his mild surprise, she didn't take offense. Fel and Park are worried about it, she reminded him. You willing to bet they're both wrong? Not really, Luke conceded, looking back at the clone. I'm just trying to imagine what having Thrawn suddenly show up would do to the New Republic. Widespread panic would be my guess, with Coruscant scrambling to find enough ships for a preemptive strike at what's left of the Empire. You don't think they'd listen to what he had to say? The way Thrawn carved his way through the New Republic the last time? Luke shook his head. They wouldn't trust him for a minute. You're probably right, Mira said. Park said there were rumors he'd returned, though how a rumor like that could get started I don't know. But he didn't mention what the reaction had been. And rumors are a lot different than if he actually walked in the door, Luke pointed out. For a minute they stood there in silence. Then Luke took a deep breath. I suppose it's an academic argument, really, when you come down to it, he said. Whatever the original Thrawn might have done, this particular being hasn't done anything wrong. Certainly nothing that deserves a summary execution. True, Mira agreed, though I imagined you'd have trouble convincing some people of that. Next question, then. Do we leave him here to wake up normally and join our friends upstairs, bearing in mind that they're not too happy with either of us or the New Republic at the moment? Or do we see if we can speed up the growth process and take him back to Coruscant? Luke whistled softly under his breath. You sure know how to find the hard questions, don't you? I've never had to find a hard question in my life, she countered tartly. They've always found me first. Luke smiled. I know the feeling. I'd rather you knew the answer, she said. Bottom line, could Coruscant handle it? From across the room came a sudden flurry of warbling. Luke turned to see R2 bouncing back and forth excitedly on his stubby legs. What is it? He called. You find the unknown regions data? The droid twittered impatiently. Okay, I'll be right there, Luke soothed him, heading for the nearest ramp down to the main floor. He started to pass the sheet-covered furniture, and paused, looking at the collection. There were half a dozen chairs of various types under there, plus a bed, a table, and a couple of things that looked like storage end tables. What do you suppose this is all about? He called back to Mara. Looks like the stuff he'll need to make this place into a cozy little apartment once he's out, Mara suggested, dropping down to the main floor and coming up beside him. He'll want some time to recover, maybe get caught up with what's been happening out there over the past 10 years. In fact, I'd run you 10 to 1 that console ring's got a direct feed from whatever news data links they've got upstairs. Yes, but why is it all piled here instead of laid out waiting for him? Luke asked. It's not like Thrawn wouldn't have known what kind of arrangement his clone would like. Interesting point, Mara agreed, her voice suddenly uneasy. Luke threw her a look. What is it? I don't know, she said slowly, looking around. Something just suddenly felt wrong. Luke looked around the room, too. Nothing seemed threatening, but suddenly he was feeling it, too. Maybe we ought to get R2 and clear out of here, he suggested quietly. Take whatever he's got and just go. Let's first see how much he's got, Mara said. She turned back towards the droid and took a step. Who dares disturb the sleep of the Syndic Mithron Orodo? A deep voice thundered from above them. Luke dropped into a half-crouch, lightsaber reflexively raised above him. He looked up to an extraordinary sight. Above the railing and second-level equipment balcony, a large ovate section of the stone ceiling was undulating like some sort of rocky fluid. Even as he watched it, it slowly formed itself into a giant face looking down at them. Who dares disturb the sleep of the Syndic Mithron Orodo? The voice repeated. Now that's a nice trick, Mara murmured. Well, go ahead. Answer it. Luke took a careful breath. We're friends, Luke called. We mean the Syndic Mithron Orodo no harm. The fluid eyes seemed to focus on him. Who dares disturb the sleep of the Syndic Mithron Orodo? Luke looked at Mara. A recording? Sounds like it, she agreed tightly. But what good does a recording... Watch it! But Luke was already spinning around, lightsaber flashing out into defensive position in front of him, as his own senses flared a warning. There were two of them, standing there on the upper section of floor. A pair of large, thick-set sentinel droids on treaded bases, each with a heavy blaster gripped in its right hand. Get behind me, Luke snapped to Mara, taking a short step in front of her. Just in time. Even as he stretched out to the Force, both sentinels opened fire. Stupid, 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 he heard Mara snarl from behind him. A big fat diversion, the oldest trick on the list, and I fell for it like some dumb farm kid. Watch your language, Luke warned. The sentinels were good, laying out a systematic targeting pattern that would have quickly taken out most opponents. So far, though, he was easily staying ahead of them. Can you do anything about them? Her reply was a spitting of blaster fire over his shoulder, raking across the sentinel's joints and glowing eyes, but there was no effect. No good. The armor's too thick for my blaster, she said. Let me try... Watch it! He's moving! Luke cut her off. The sentinel on the left had suddenly started rolling on its treads along the raised floor ring towards the far end of the room, blaster still firing. Luke clenched his teeth, stretching out harder to the Force, feeling sweat breaking out on his forehead. With the source of the blaster bolts now coming from two different directions, and with the separation between them growing ever wider, it was becoming harder and harder for him to physically get the lightsaber blade back and forth fast enough to block the shots. Behind him, he heard the snap hiss as Mara ignited their own lightsaber, followed by a sudden yelp and a muffled thud. What happened? Luke snapped, not daring to take his attention off the sentinels. Don't try to walk, Mara warned, her voice inexplicably coming from the floor beneath him. Thrawn left another surprise for unwanted guests. Luke frowned. What do you mean? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the blue-white blade of her lightsaber cut across one of the shots from the more distant sentinel, now at the far end of the room. Okay, I've got this one, she said. If you could spare a second, take a look at the floor. Letting the Force guide his hands, Luke risked a quick look down at his feet. One glance was all he needed. The floor had sprouted loops of green-black cord that had formed themselves into a tangled mass around their feet. Looks like they extruded themselves out of the cracks between the tiles, Mira went on. First step I took, my foot tried to catch in one of these loops. Clever, Luke agreed tightly. I guess that rules out any chance of running for it. At least now we know why all the furniture's stacked off to one side, Mira added. You don't want to clutter your killing field with a lot of stuff the victims might be able to hide behind. Luke, this other sentinel's still coming. Luke risked a glance. The second sentinel had rounded the far end of the room and was now rolling steadily around the other side, and in maybe 10 seconds it would reach a point directly across from Mira. Quick, before it gets any closer, he told her, easing a little to his left so he could again defend against both sentinels. Use your lightsaber on it. Right, Mira said, and through his haze of concentration he felt her emotional twinge at the memory of her less-than-perfect handling of the weapon back in the chamber where they'd taken out all the stalactites and stalagmites together. But the moment passed, and as he leaned hard into the effort of blocking the barrage of shots, he saw the flash as her lightsaber windmilled across the room towards the sentinel. It sliced cleanly into the intersection of head and body, and then abruptly the blue-white blade vanished. What happened? Luke demanded. Blast it, Mira snarled. Out of the corner of Luke's eye, he saw the blade reappear, swing into the sentinel, and again vanish. He put a layer of cortosis ore under the armor. Then go for the blaster, Luke said. Right. The blue-white blade sizzled out again. There was a crackle of broken metal and plastic, and suddenly that point of danger faded from Luke's mind. Good job, he called to Mira, shifting his full attention to the sentinel in front of him. Now get around here and do the same thing to this one. He swiveled back again, getting his lightsaber blade around just in time. Suddenly, the sentinel on Mira's side had started shooting again. Watch it, Mira snapped a belated warning. It had another blaster holstered for its left hand. Oh, shav it. What? Never mind, Luke growled. In response to Mira's attack, the sentinel facing him had now drawn a second blaster for concealment with its left hand. He's got a second blaster for the right, too. I got it! Luke cut her off, leaning still harder into his defense. With twice as many shots coming in now from each of the sentinels, they were in worse shape than they had been before. A missed blaster bolt sizzled painfully across the top of his left shoulder. Sorry, Mira said, her back pressing against his now, the hum of her lightsaber like an angry insect behind him. What do we do now? Luke grimaced. The row of Ysalamiri-equipped chiss he'd faced up in the fortress had been bad enough, but at least there they'd had the option of shooting their opponents if defense became too difficult. Here, trapped in the middle of an open room, caught in the crossfire from two tireless droids who couldn't be killed, with tangling cords around their feet precluding any chance of fast escape. Luke, Mira called again over the sound and fury. You hear me? I heard you, he snapped back. So what do we do? Luke swallowed hard. I have no idea. Beneath Leia, the Predominance's great bulk shuddered as another proton torpedo got through the Ashori defenses, its violent explosion ripping another piece out of the hull. Ahead out the main bridge canopy, the sky was a tangle of turbolaser blasts splashing across their shields or occasionally burning through to vaporize layers of metal or transparent steel. But in that sudden, heart-stopping moment, none of that mattered. Not the battle, not her own life, not even the terrible threat of civil war. With that flicker of distant emotion, that sudden tremor in the Force, one thing alone had surged to overriding importance for her. Somewhere out there, Han was in deadly danger. Captain Abmaru, she shouted over the din of the bridge, crossing quickly towards the command console. Two guards raised their blasters warningly. Without thinking, Leia stretched out with the Force to turn the weapons aside as she passed. Captain, I must speak with you right away. I am busy, Counselor, the Ashori captain snarled, not even bothering to look at her. You'll be busier than you care to be if you don't listen to me, Leia bit out, straining with all her strength towards the wispy, unclear sensation that was Han. His emotions were still seething with danger and threat and helpless fury, but try as she might, she couldn't penetrate through the emotion and the distance to his underlying thoughts. But there was one thing that was very clear. "There's some new threat waiting out there," she told Muru. "One you're completely unaware of." "Other threats are meaningless," Muru all but screamed. "There can be no other concern but the Diamolan attackers around us." "Captain!" She broke off at a feathery touch on her arm. "It's no use, Counselor," Gavresom said, his long face tight and almost bitter. "He can't and won't think that far ahead. Not with his ship under immediate attack. Can you tell me what this threat is?" Leia looked out the canopy, trying to pierce the dazzlingly lethal light show outside. "Han's in danger," she said. "Where? How?" "I don't know," she said, her stomach twisting with her own sense of helplessness. "I can't pick up his thoughts clearly enough." "Who else might know?" Gavresom asked. Leia took a deep breath, forcing calmness into her mind. Gavresom was right. What Han needed was for her to put aside her emotions and think clearly. "Elegos was with him on the Falcon," she said, stretching out again with the Force. But there was nothing. "I can't even sense him." "Who else might know?" Gavresom persisted. "Someone closer at hand." Leia looked out at the battle again, a sudden tentative flicker of hope stirring in her. "Lando. Han might have said something to Lando." "Then we must talk to him," Gavresom said firmly. "I will go speak to the captain about piercing the Diamolan jamming. In the meantime, is there anything your Jedi skills can do about it?" Leia took a deep breath. "I don't know," she said. "Let me try." "I tell you, this can't wait," Lando insisted, throwing every bit of urgency and intimidation he could muster into his voice. "I have to speak to High Counselor Organa Solo right away. The whole fate of the New Republic might well hang on the edge, not to mention your own lives." "Really?" Senator Myatamia said, his voice icy calm. Diamala, Lando knew, were notoriously hard to read, but it was abundantly clear the senator wasn't impressed. "And what is the nature of this threat?" "My friend Hand went out to take a look at that comet out there," Lando said. "I was watching him on macro binoculars, and he just vanished." Myatamia's cheeks creased. "You mean he crashed?" "I mean he vanished," Lando insisted. "Right out in the open." "Yet how truly open is the region around a comet?" the Diamal pointed out, an ear twitching. "He may have veered into the gases of the tail, or you may have lost sight of him briefly in the glare of sunlight from the surface." Lando grimaced. Not only was Myatamia not convinced, he wasn't ever going to give it a fair hearing. But Lando knew what he had seen. "All right, then," he said between clenched teeth. "In that case, I'm calling in the favor you owe me." Both ears twitched this time. "What favor is this?" "I gave you a ride to Coruscant from Silpar, remember?" Lando reminded him. "You've never paid me back for that." "You stated at the time that you would not require any payment other than our conversation." "I lied," Lando said evenly, "and I want my favor now." Myatamia eyed him darkly. "We are in a combat situation." "This won't jeopardize that." Lando gestured at the bridge, lying beyond the transparent steel wall of the observation deck he and Myatamia were standing on. "All I want is for the jamming of the predominance lifted, just on Counselor Organa Solo's personal comlink frequency. Just that one frequency, that's all." The Diamal shook his head. "I cannot gamble that such an action would not create additional danger for Diamalan lives and goods." He turned away, facing the battle again. Lando swallowed a curse, looking past him and the besieged Ashori ship at the comet glowing with such deceptive serenity out beyond the fighting. Han had asked for his help. Han trusted him. And he did know what he'd seen. "All right," he said, stepping squarely in front of Myatamia again. It was time to put his money where it counted. "A gamble, you say? Fine. Let's gamble." He pointed at the viewport at the Ashori ship. "Here's the bet. You let me talk to Leia right now, and if the threat turns out not to be as serious as I claim it is, you and the Diamala will get my mining and casino operation on Varn." The senator's ears twitched. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," Lando said. My friend's in danger, and I'm the only one who can help him. For a long moment the Diamol stared at him. Very well, he said at last. High Counselor Organa Solo's private comlink frequency only, and for no more than 2 minutes. Done, Lando nodded. How fast can you arrange it? My Atami had turned towards the observation deck's intercom and spoke rapidly in the Diamolan language. He was answered in kind. There was one more quick exchange. It is done, he said, turning back to Lando. Your 2 minutes are running. Lando already had his comlink out and keyed. Leia? Lando, her relieved voice came back instantly. I was hoping to get through to you. Han's in trouble. I know, Lando said. He went with Carib to check out the comet and asked me to watch with macro binoculars. They cut in close to the surface and then just disappeared. What do you mean, disappeared? Leia asked anxiously. As if they'd crashed? No, Lando said grimly. As if they'd dipped inside a cloaking shield. He heard her sharp intake of air. Lando, we've got to get over there right away. If there's an Imperial ship hiding out there... Hey, no argument here, Lando said. But I've already used up all my favors getting this call through. All right, Leia said, her voice suddenly dark. It's up to me, then. What are you going to do? Lando asked. I'm going to help Han, she said, her voice as cold as he'd ever heard it. Stay clear. You don't want to get involved in this. The transmission clicked off. Too late for that, Leia, he muttered at the dead comlink. Years and years too late. Another barrage of turbolaser fire lanced out from the nearest of the 2 Golan weapons platforms, the spread targeting the group of starfighters harrying its flank. Wedge twisted his X-Wing safely between the shots and did a quick check of the rest of his squadron. As with the last such salvo, and the 4 or 5 before it, none of them had taken any damage. Neither, as far as he could tell, had anyone else in the attack fleet. Bella Bliss's strategy of staying just at the edge of the Golan's kill zone had so far paid off. But that strategy was about to change. All fighter wings, this is Paris, the voice of the Peregrine's fighter commander came tautly through his headset. Captain Trina has confirmed that General Bella Bliss is definitely in trouble in there. Wedge grimaced, wondering what about the situation needed any confirmation in the first place. Nose to nose with another Imperial Star Destroyer, pinned in place by probably every heavy tractor beam the Ubiqtorate Base could bring to bear. Look, they're firing, Rogue 5 snapped. Everything they've got, looks like. I see it, Wedge said, gazing through the separating distance at the blaze of turbolaser fire flashing out from the errant Venture, his last faint hope that Bella Bliss might be able to still talk his way out of this evaporating like morning mist at sunrise. If he'd opened fire on the base, it meant the bluff had failed. It also meant he was running low on time. That second Star Destroyer, not to mention the Ubiqtorate Base commander, wasn't just going to sit there while Bella Bliss vaped their tractor emplacements and got away. Trena and the rest of the fleet command staff aboard the Peregrine had clearly come to the same conclusion. Okay, fighters, Paris said. The fleet's going in, and we're going in hard. Your job is to draw fire away from the main ships, help whenever you can to punch a hole in the defense perimeter, and be ready to run screen when the Imperials finally launch their own fighters. All wings, acknowledge and prepare. Rogue leader, copy, Wedge said, then keyed for the squadron's private frequency. Well, rogues, you've all had a look at the perimeter. Any thoughts on where the weak spots are? Maybe, Rogue 12 said. Seems to me the turbolasers on the starboard side of that second Golan have a slight flutter. You sure? Rogue 3 asked. I didn't notice anything. It's small, but it's there, Rogue 12 said. It may be just enough to leave a small gap between... General Antilles, a new voice cut in. Wedge frowned. It was a familiar voice, but not one of his squadron. This is Antilles, he confirmed cautiously. This is Talon Card. How are things? It took Wedge a second to find his voice. Card, what in blazes are you doing here? He demanded. To be perfectly honest, trying to get past your forces, Card said. Is Commander Horn there with you? I'm here, Rogue 9 said. What do you want? I want to collect on a favor you owe me, Card said. The one we discussed the last time as we were together on the errant Venture. Remember? There was an exasperated sounding noise in Wedge's headset. Card, are you crazy? We're in the middle of a battle here. Which is precisely why I need the favor now, Card said. I need you to escort me through the New Republic lines. To where? Rogue 9 countered. In case you hadn't noticed, on the other side of our lines is an Imperial Ubiqtorate Base. Which conveniently happens to be my destination, Card told him. Wedge snorted gently. The wild card must be a lot better armored than I thought. The Imperials won't be a problem, Card said. I have a high-level code for getting through their lines. My problem is your lines. Look, Card, I don't know what you're up to, Rogue 9 said, and frankly, right now I don't really care, but we have a job to do here. Perhaps I can make that job unnecessary, Card said, a sudden edge in his voice. You get me inside, and I may be able to stop this battle completely. Really, Rogue 2 said, his voice suddenly suspicious. May I ask how exactly you plan to do that? There was a slight pause, and Wedge could picture Card smiling that mysterious smile he was so fond of. Let's just say I'm holding the ultimate bargaining chip, he said softly. And that would be? All wings, this is Paris, the fighter commander's voice came on. Run to formation. We're heading in. Wedge took a deep breath. They were under official orders now, with no room for maneuvering or stalling or anything else. But General Bella Bliss's life was on the line here. Card, this is Antilles, he said. Where are you? Coming up behind and above the Peregrine, Card told him. Are you starting an attack? Something like that, Wedge said, checking his rear scanner. The wild card was there all right, hanging a respectful distance back from the New Republic sentry line. Stay put. We'll be right there. Rogues, let's go. He turned the X-Wing hard over and headed towards their rear. There was a click in his headset as someone keyed to his personal frequency. Wedge, what are you doing? Rogue 9 demanded. We're under orders. Look, if this is about this so-called favor I owe him. I'm not worried about favors right now, Corran, Wedge assured him. But you heard what Card said. He's got an Imperial code for getting through their perimeter. Yes, I remember, but his having an access code won't do us any good. Ordinarily, no, Wedge agreed, smiling tightly. But also remember what Rogue 12 said about that turbolaser flutter. If we guide Card in under that particular bank, and if we then stay clustered real close behind him... Rogue 9 hissed thoughtfully. That might just do it. It's worth a try anyway, Wedge said, because if they could get in behind the perimeter, they'd have a far better shot at knocking out the tractor emplacements that held the errant Venture trapped. And the faster they knocked out those emplacements, the sooner Bella Bliss would be able to turn his ship around and make a run for safety. Wedge, Rogue 9 said, his voice sounding odd. You don't suppose Card really can stop the battle, do you? Wedge started to shake his head. Paused. This was Corran Horn, Jedi, asking the question. Not really, he said cautiously. The Imperials want Bella Bliss, that much is for sure. The only reason I can think of why they'd let him go is if they got something they wanted even more. That's what I was thinking too, Rogue 9 said, his voice still odd. So why am I also thinking Card really does have a shot at this? Wedge felt a shiver tingle in the back of his neck. I don't know, he said grimly. All I know is that he's our best chance at getting Bella Bliss and Booster out of there alive. Right now, that's all I care about. They had reached the wild card now, and Wedge pulled his fighter around in a sharp turn into forward escort position. Okay, Card, here we go, he said, double-checking that the rest of the squadron was in position. Stay close and follow me. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.